It is now time for Burger Becky talking about Tass Times in Tonetown, a game I remember seeing at computer stores demonstrating the GS back when it was new. Take it
Well,
away.
yeah. Hello, everybody there at KansasFest 2021. As you can see, I'm wearing my KansasFest shirt. Not for this session because I didn't get one. I'm just giving you some guilt here. Let's talk about Tass Times in Tonetown. Last KansasFest, I spoke about the last commercial 2GS game ever released, which was Out of This World. So now I'm going to go use the Wayback Machine to talk about the very first commercial game for the Apple IIGS. And boy, its development was almost as bad as Doom 3DO, mostly because management was making decisions and I told them to basically go jump in a lake. To put it in perspective, the Apple IIGS was released in September of 1986. Interplay Productions, the company that I was one of the founders of, we were formed in 1983, around October, November, somewhere in that time frame. So the company was only 2.5 years old, and we were still kind of starving. We had done 3 games already before for Activision. Borrowed Time, Mind Shadow, and Tracer Sanction. All 3 games are graphic text adventures. And the technology was evolving as time went on. In early 1986, I did a game called Tass Times in Tonetown, and I did it for the Apple IIe, for the Commodore 64, and we even had a Amiga and a PC version in development at the time. Well, somewhere around June, July, Apple was telling us, Activision, we really like you to be a supporter of this brand new platform we were coming out with. And this brand new platform is, we can't tell you. And it's like, of course, it's like, we can't tell you. It's just like, so it's Mac related because, they released the Mac in 1984. But no, it's for the Apple II. It's like, and to me, I'm like, here I am with my Apple II Plus, with a Titan Accelerator 2E. So it was already running about 4, and I overclocked the thing to like about 8 megahertz. I did some mods on it. But that's what I was using for my development system with a Axlon RAM disk. I mean, I was styling. I had like one of the fastest computers you can have in 1986. But what happened later was that finally Apple said, okay, we'll let you in on it. It's called the Cortland. And the Cortland is going to have this beautiful sound chip in it. It's going to come from this synthesizer called the Ensoniq SQ1. And it's going to be really, really cool. And I thought, great. So eventually, they sent me one of the prototypes, which looked like an Apple IIe. It's just that you pop open the lid, and there's definitely a different motherboard in there. They essentially sold this as an Apple IIe upgrade kit. But that is how they originally developed the Apple IIGS. It was the Apple IIe upgrade kit. So they took the Apple IIe case, they put the motherboard in it. You had your keyboard plugging directly into the a slot onto the motherboard so you can read the keyboard. But the problem was that the operating system wasn't done yet. So they had ProDOS 16, and there was no graphical shell. I think they originally gave us like Mouse Desk or something like that. They licensed, which was a 65 CO2 desktop that emulated the Mac desktop for the Apple IIc and the IIe. So of course they were saying this is what it's gonna be like. So when they proposed to us, hey, let's make a 2GS specific version of Tass Times in Tonetown, management, and in a indirect way, I thought all this was really going to be was an Apple IIe with a Mockingbird, because that's all they really were telling us, was that this is a brand new computer. It's got this awesome sound chip. And of course, when they hand it to us, it looks just like an Apple IIe. So that was my marching orders. Take the music from the Commodore 64 version, port it over as is to the Apple IIGS, and then we'll just ship it as a 2GS enhanced version, and it'll just be the Apple IIe game. Of course, Apple then said the machine is going to use 3.5-inch discs instead of 5 1/4, which is like oh, so we can't just do a rev, the Apple IIe version on a floppy. We have to put it on this brand new disk, the Mac disk that is. And they're going like, yeah, the operating system ProDOS 16 was literally ProDOS 8 with a couple of extra enhancements to it. GSOS wasn't even invented yet. It wouldn't come out till 1988. So you really need to understand how primitive the development tools were. I was using Merlin as my assembler, and I was able to get a beta of Merlin Pro, which had the 65816 extensions to be able to build for the 65816 instruction set. However, it was buggy as all get out. So I then went ahead and just started look at the manual, just crammed all I could to figure out what you could do. And then they've had this thing called super high res. I'm like, what's that? So I went ahead and just threw together some little sample programs, turn on super high res. And as soon as I realized I had a 320 by 200 resolution screen, 16 colors, with a palette, I'm like, screw an Apple IIe port in which was just going to be the Apple IIe game with enhanced music. I was like, we have an Amiga version development, right? So yeah. So I ran over to the art department and asked them, give me all the art you have for Task Times in Tonetown for the Amiga. Grabbed all that art, quickly wrote a little converter program to convert it all to the format for the 2GS, and then put it up on the screen. So it's like, okay, I've got my 2GS version. The problem, of course, is that because the assemblers really didn't work, I still had to write the code in 65C02, not 6502, because at least Merlin already had 65C02 and was perfectly working fine. It was the 65816 instructions that were kind of iffy in how it built it. So I was able to at least write some of the graphic routines in 65816 to draw to the super high-res screen due to banking. But the rest of the code, if you look at the original ProDOS 16 version of Task Times in Tonetown, you will find, I'd say about 80% of the code is literally the same code from the 2E version. I didn't change a line of it. It was all running in the old 64K base memory. It just happened to call some subroutines that would draw to the super high-res screen and not to the Apple IIe screen. And of course, because I was using the super high-res screen, I was able to at least free up the 8K buffer for where the video should be to put in the special Apple IIGS stuff. Well, then once I started showing off some of the things I could do with the Ensoniq chip, such as like uploading audio, playing digital sound, I showed it to Russell Lieblich over at Activision. Now, at the time, he's the one who programmed the Masters of the Lamps for the Commodore 64, and he was essentially their audio god at Activision. And when I told him the chipset in here is the Ensoniq ESQ1, he goes like, really? He pulls out his Ensoniq ESQ1 and says, can that machine play this sound? And he starts playing some chords. And I says, okay, give me the floppy disk from the Ensoniq that had the samples. Went home, spent a day writing a small driver to take those samples and play them exactly as he found it. Went back to his office and says, here's my 2GS, let's listen. And played the song, just like the it's like a Rachmaninoff song like that. And when he heard that, he was like, oh my God, where's this machine been all my life? And we then essentially locked ourselves in his music room as he was creating samples. And I was sitting there with this Cortland prototype, which already Interplay was freaking out because I wasn't supposed to take that thing out of the office. But even though I was in an Activision building, and he would be playing some music and I'd play it on the 2GS. He'd play some music, he'd play it on the 2GS until we got the dun 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 dun. And there was we had to make samples like the clap. We actually got like about 6 or 7 people to come in the room, and he had the microphone right there, and it goes, everybody, 1, 2, 3. and we all did it together. And 1, 2, 3, and we did like 4 or 5 times, and that ended up being the sample to do the background like that. Most of the other samples came from the Ensoniq ESQ1, an actual Ensoniq ESQ1. Now, also at the time, there was no such thing as MIDI synth. So therefore, all I was doing, I was taking the audio samples, doing just a little multiplying on them to give them some attack, decay, sustain, release. But that's really all I did when it came to playing back the notes, because I was having to write not only the music sequencer, the music uploader, and the player while I was doing all these different songs. There was like about 5 or 6 songs in the game. It was like a death song, then there was another song that was supposed to be for a concert that ended up that we had to scrap because we just couldn't finish it in time. But once we got these tracks done, then I went back to the Interplay offices, got the rest of the art that I asked for because I needed some specific art for the 2GS, and the art department says, okay, just use Deluxe Paint on the Amiga. Just give me the Amiga files, I'll convert them. And converted them all, put this thing together, and it was from the day I got the Cortland to the day I actually had a working version of the game you could play from start to finish was about 3.5 weeks. It took another week for us to finish up some things with the audio driver because I had to deal with interrupts and stuff, which was something that on the Apple II you never really had to deal with. But when you had a music driver that was all interrupt driven running off of a floppy disk, I had to factor that all into its and to make sure the game wouldn't pause the music when you're loading in stuff off the drive and so forth. But the game was written for Apple ProDOS, which was the original Apple IIe version. All the menus and stuff like that was using my proprietary code that I essentially wrote for the Apple IIe, the Commodore version, because there was no such thing really as a working Apple IIgs toolbox, even though the ROM 02GS has a toolbox in it. GSOS and all the Finder, all that stuff was still like a year away. But we managed to get the game about 3.5 weeks in with some of the songs in. And at that point, we then sent a copy of it to the people over at Apple. And when they loaded up the game, because at the time, all the games that were being submitted were just literally Apple IIe games with some extra music or maybe just a 2E game on a 3.5-inch disc, and that's all they were shipping. Ours was an actual 2GS game. And as soon as they saw that and they listened to the music going da 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 da, they said, we got to highlight this game. We have to show this off. And at that point, Activision was like thinking, oh, this game's doing okay. It's great. And now Apple's all excited about it. So they're thinking like, holy hell. So then that put more pressure on me to put in more Apple 2GS features. And I'm like, I'm already using the game already used the mouse, so I didn't need to add mouse support because they didn't know the game used the mouse. It turned out that when they tested on the Cortland at Apple, they didn't have a mouse connected, so that there was no cursor. The game was smart enough that if you don't have a mouse plugged in, it wouldn't show the cursor. So they thought the game was all keyboard related, and they sent me a bug report saying, you need to make this game support the mouse. I'm like, plug one in? And they did. It's like, oh, sorry. But after that was all done, I got the game, put it onto a disc, and was crossing my fingers going like, please don't make any bugs in there. Please don't let there be any bugs in there, because there was no time to test the game from start to finish. I did play the game. I mean, once the game was pretty much done, I played it from start to finish, did a couple of other endings, but people could type in other words or stuff like that. Maybe they might find a bug, but it just so happened that the game ran perfectly. And once the game was put into its box, and Activision was already thinking forward, when they made the box for Tass Times and Tonetown, they put the system requirements in a little band near the bottom. And that therefore, if they wanted to do a new version of the game, they just changed that sticker. So that's what they did. They put a little sticker in there saying Apple IIGS requires I think the minimum system spec was 256K, although the game honestly would run with 128K because it didn't do anything outside of the 2 banks of memory for the original ProDOS 8 version. I mean, I didn't use any of the other memory in the computer because I didn't have time, nor was there anything really out there that used it. Because again, ProDOS 16 was designed, the desktop for it was designed for an Apple IIc, and therefore it only ran 128K. So I only used 128K. I didn't know there was another 256K sitting in the machine. And also, what's hilarious was that later on, when Apple realized that GSOS was going to take about 128K to 256K to run, they had to start shipping Apple IIGSs with an extra memory expansion card to get it to a minimum of 512K. Oops. But the Tass Times, the original ProDOS 8 version, you could take the memory expansion card out and the game will run just fine, because it really didn't, I did not have time in order for me to take advantage of any extended memory or any other things, because it literally was an Apple IIe game with the device drivers changed to draw to the 2GS's graphics screen, and the sound is this little bespoke driver that's sitting inside of the memory that would have been the standard high-res buffer, and that included the musical notes, and a couple of things that I remember putting the samples up in the upper 120K, the upper 64K memory. That's where I put the samples, because the game itself, even with the super high-res graphics, was running in 64K. And the main reason that even occurred was that when I designed Borrowed Time and then Tass Times in Tonetown, based on the same engine, used the same thing, the game was written with a virtual memory machine in which all the data is considered just one big chunk of memory. And then, much like Infocom, I would have the special code which would read memory from pointers, and it would load in sectors into this a reference counted buffer. So I would keep the most used memory in memory, and the others would be purged out. Well, I just used that same system. I didn't change a line of code. It just happened to have a lot more data, because like when I was loading in the Apple IIGS super high-res images, it would just happen to just load more memory, but it went through the same system, drew the graphics on the screen, and that was it. Which is why the game, even though it's a 2GS game, the core really ran in 64K. So after we shipped the game, then Apple did this whole spiel. I think it was around mid-September or something like that, when they actually officially released the 2GS. And they had all these stores with a 2GS, a color monitor, and those Bose speakers. And almost everybody was playing the theme song from Tass Times in Tonetown. Because you just put the disc in the drive, boot it up, and the first thing it does is shows a picture of Ennio, the dog, doing like this, and then background music going and going through those Bose speakers. The music sounded awesome, especially in 1986. It's like this music coming from a computer like that just was not even heard of. Even the Amiga didn't have that kind of hardware, for audio. And the Amiga was out already for one whole year, and everybody was thinking the Amiga was going to be the thing for both graphics and sound. But now there's this little tiny computer from Apple which has graphics that seem to be the same as the Amiga. It's one bit less, because the Amiga is 32 bits per pixel, the 2GS is 16. But the sound chip just blew away the Amiga. So at that point, as I was told, the game Tass Times in Tonetown was responsible for selling thousands of 2GSs in the first week, because people were saying, oh my goodness, if this computer can play this kind of music, I can't wait to see what other titles are going to come out for it. And that began my love affair of the 2GS, because the fact that the 2GS's video hardware was just so simple to use, unlike the 7-bit monstrosity that other talks have already been, like the previous talk talked about double high res, and it's fun. The 2GS's video hardware was just straightforward, the equivalent of VGA on the PC, except 4 bits per pixel. You just couldn't be any easier than that. I like this. Joseph Malone says, not really fair. And Sonic had more voices, but the Amiga had more flexible samples. That's not true. The Sonic chip has 32 voices, although you tend to use 2 of the voices for the timer, so you just remove that. But the 30 voices left, you can actually modulate them in pairs to get 15 polyphonic voices. And then if you want to divide them again, you can actually make 4 voices connected together to make a quadraphonic voice, in which you can have one sample doing the attack, decay, sustain, release. Another one is the sample itself. Another one is a multiplier. And the last one could be used for like an echo effect. I mean, it's just, you really have to do some crazy programming to do it, but you can do it. In fact, if you use MIDI synth and you listen to the harmonics in it, you can hear that that's something that's not quite being done on the Amiga. Plus the fact that on the Apple IIGS, they actually used a much better audio amplifier circuitry, so that if you used a good pair of speakers connected directly to that circuitry, it's better filtered than what's coming out of the DACs from the Amiga. Because the Amiga, all it really is just a bunch of digital analog converters tied to a DMA channel. So you had to do all your mixing in software. And also another thing is that on the Sonic, it does the mixing at 16 bits internally, so that when it spits it out, even though it's still 8 bits, it can handle the mixing and take care of that. Whereas on the Amiga, it's just an 8-bit digital analog converter. So, it's one where, yeah, if you want to spend some CPU time on the Amiga, you could get technically better music and sound through mixing and stuff like that. And also another one is that the Sonic's maximum sample rate is 100 and I think it was like 8. No. If I turn off all the sounds and so forth, it turns out to be something like in the neighborhood of like 120 kilohertz is the actual sample rate you can if you wanted to. It's not recommended. I mean, 64K of memory, you run out of 116K samples in half a second. So, there are limitations where, yeah, there's some theoretical maximums on the Sonic chip on the Apple IIGS, which are just like silly because you only have 64K of audio memory. And of course, that's another thing about the 2GS, is that because the audio chip is reading its samples from its own audio buffer, it doesn't take any CPU cycles or memory cycles from the main Apple II. So therefore, it can be playing audio samples and not slowing things down, whereas at least on the Amiga, it has to do DMA reads, so it's actually slowing down the main computer the more you're actually pulling data from the memory bus onto the audio chip. So yeah, there's all this stuff. And on one last thing is also the 2GS had stereo sound, and I actually used that on the soundtrack of Pastimes in Tonetown, because if you actually get the stereo mod, the music is stereo. I actually play, some instruments are played exclusively on the left speaker, others are played on the right, and some of them are played at different locations, because Russell and I actually made a chart of where all the instruments are, and we set the volumes based on their locations, so that therefore, if you just close your eyes and listen to the music, you can actually hear the location of each of the person who's playing the instrument for the entire song. That's something that just really wasn't, it didn't come across that well because most people didn't have the stereo mod. But if you had it, you would notice it. But let's see here. Anything else? Because I'm running out of time. I'm going to go just open up for questions. But the only thing left I could mention is that 2 years later, I went back to the source code of Pastimes in Tonetown and did a proper 2GS version. That's why if you go onto online and so forth and you find task.system and it actually runs under ProDOS as GSOS with the actual Windows and stuff like that, you're welcome. Let's see. Any chance for a Pastimes hard HD remaster? Activision owns the IP. It literally is a deal with me and Activision. And it's just one where that right now, last time I talked to them, they seem to have a problem with women and they're being sued for it. And I'm just going to wait a while until it calms down and try again. Let's see. There you go, Josh. Question time. Why do you hate Amiga? I don't hate Amiga. I just pointing out that there are differences in the Amiga hardware versus the 2GS. I mean, let's face it, the Amiga had a blitter. I would have killed to have a blitter on the 2GS. Oh, I would have killed for it. I remember I was even talking with Apple engineers because when they were talking about the Mark Twain, one of the things I was campaigning heavy for was for them to include a blitter, because, and they could have even sold a blitter as an add-on card for 2GSs so that the old 2GSs could get it as well as the new 2GS could have it. But as we already know, the Mark Twain never shipped, you know, the ROM 4GS. So, and I was even campaigning for the ROM 3, and I know there were people trying to do a hardware blitter, but that's, you know, score one for the Amiga on that one. Someone asks, Becky, start a podcast. Follow Burger Time on YouTube or Twitch. In fact, I'm on Twitch TV irregularly. But since I am running out of time, you can always find me at Burger Becky, burgerbecky.com, on Twitch, Twitter. Follow me. My company's name is Old School, OLDESKUUL. If anybody, I might be able to take one more question. I'm looking in the Discord right now. Let's see here. KFest time. Let's see here. Okay.
Becky, somebody asked about chance of a source code release, or is that also under the rights issue?
The source code release is one where I just never thought about it. I own the source. I own all the source to pretty much every one of my games I did. So I have released some, like Space Ace for the 2GS was released. That was a couple of years back. And of course, Doom. Currently, the one I'm working with, because it got sold, was the source code for Wolfenstein 3D for the Macintosh. The latest version, the one that runs on Mac OS X and iOS and other things that I did. But unfortunately, because Bethesda got bought by Microsoft, it's like back to square one. Who knows? But however, the other programs is one where I'm putting together a tool that allows you to build 6502 programs on Visual Studio through a plugin. And once I have that, then I'm going to do the source code releases, because then I could just say, just load up Visual Studio, load up this plugin, and then you can build it, and you'll have the exact same game I got. All right. Any last minute questions? Well, other than that, other than me telling a manager, screw you, that is the reason why we have Task Times in Tonetown for the 2GS with Amiga graphics instead of literally the 2E version with better music, because that is what I was told to create.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that talk. It's always great to hear your stories.
Anytime.